Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Ari Weinzweig. Ari is the co-founding partner of Zingerman's Community of Businesses, an iconic collaborative of food-focused businesses in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Zingerman's began in 1982 as a small deli and has since grown into a community of a dozen businesses focused on full-flavored and traditional food, along with exceptional service and creating positive experiences for their customers. The organization overall has a staff of over 700, 275 of whom own a share in the business, as well as 18 managing partners, and will do over $80 million in sales this year. Zingerman's has received numerous accolades over the years, and Ari has received a Lifetime Achievement Award from Bon Appetit and recognition from the American Cheese Society for its dedication to quality. Ari holds a degree in Russian history and is an accomplished author, having written 15 books and pamphlets, including A Lapsed Anarchist's Approach to Building a Great Business, which was the first of his many publications, the pamphlet, A Revolution of Dignity in the 21st Century Workplace, and the chapbook, Life Lessons I Learned from Being a Line Cook, are some of his most recent releases. His insight out of the mainstream perspectives of leadership in life, combined with a deep passion for exceptional food, has helped the Zingerman's community become a cherished brand for customers worldwide. Now, before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. One recent client was able to add over $900 per employee per year in extra cash flow by implementing one of our innovative programs. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefitsagency.com. Now back to our guest today, the co-founder of Zingerman's, Ari. I appreciate you making the time to share your story today.
My pleasure, Anthony. Good to see you.
All right, let's do it. So take us back to the humble beginnings. What was the inspiration for starting your first restaurant?
Well, the writer Rebecca Solnit says that starting a story, deciding where a story begins is like dipping a cup in the ocean. So there's 100 different places we could start this, but I'll start it today with, you're in the Midwest, I'm in the Midwest, I came from the Midwest. So I grew up in Chicago. I came here to Ann Arbor to go to school at University of Michigan, which many people will have seen on football weekends on TV, sometimes playing Ohio State, and studied Russian history, like you said, and also studied anarchism quite a bit. University of Michigan has the largest anarchist collection in the country. It's not a well-publicized promotional piece for them, but it's the truth. It's a great collection in the grad library. Anyway, after graduating with my history degree, I had really no clue what I was going to do next. Visioning, as you probably know, is a huge piece of our work here. We write visions for pretty much everything we work on. When I graduated, I had no vision at all. Only what David Whyte, W-H-Y-T-E, the poet and writer whose work I really admire and appreciate, he calls it the via negativa. This is where you're completely clueless about where you would like to go, but you're very clear where you don't want to go. I knew I didn't want to go home. And in order to facilitate that financially, I needed a job, and I had driven a taxi part-time while I was in school, which was fine, but not particularly interesting. One of my college roommates was waiting tables at a restaurant in downtown Ann Arbor, and for those who've never been here, the whole town's only about 100,000 people, so 15 minutes from one end to the other, no matter where you are. And so I thought, all right, I don't know. He likes his job. I don't know anything about restaurants or food or waiting tables, but I got to do something. So I went and applied for that job. And they said they'd call after an interview. And I waited a couple of weeks and they hadn't called. So my anxiety was starting to go up. And so I went back and I reapplied as a busboy, thinking, if I do good work, they'll promote me. And once again, we had a nice interview. Once again, they didn't call. So then another couple of weeks went by. Rent was coming due. I was getting really nervous. I really didn't want to move home, so I went back and offered to do anything, which I now know that third time we could call emotional resilience, in the spirit of your podcast theme. But I didn't know that at the time. Anyway, they said, "Great, do you want to wash dishes?" And I said, "Sure, I'll do anything. I need to work." And they said, "Awesome. Can you start tomorrow?" And I did. So that's how I got going. I really had no intention of doing anything other than paying rent. But it turned out that I stumbled into work that I really love. I still cook every night at home. I work the floor at Zingerman's Roadhouse every night for an hour or two or whatever, just to always, it's very grounding for me. And then I get home and we eat like Spaniards in our house, like 11 o'clock at night. But anyway, so I lucked out because I stumbled into work that I really love, and then also great people. So my business partner, Paul Saginaw, who's been in this with me since the get-go, he was the general manager, and it was his first day as GM was my first day as dishwasher. So that's how we met. I started prepping and then line cooking as per the chapbook that you referenced in your very nice intro. And I started to be a line cook and then manage kitchens. And I worked for them for about 4 years total. Paul left about halfway through that 4-year stint, and he opened a little fish market that's here in town still, called Monahan's, one of the best in the country to this day. And he and I stayed friends. And fall of 1981, which is now ancient history, closer to World War II than it is to today.
That's a crazy stat.
I decided I was, I didn't hate going to work, but it was just less and less inspiring. They didn't write visions, but I could see where they were headed was not where I really wanted to head. So I thought, you know what, screw it. It's time to do something else. So I gave 2 months notice, November 181. I really had no clue what would be next. It was just time to get out of there. And in one of those nice life stories that actually worked out, Paul called me like 2 days later and he said, "Hey, this building's coming open near the fish market. Let's go check it out." And he had grown up in Detroit where you could get good deli food. And in Chicago where I grew up, you could get it. You couldn't really get it here. And somehow within a week, we decided we would open. And somehow 4.5 months later, we had renovated the whole space, redone the floors, the walls, written the menu, costed the menu, ordered product, got the equipment in, and we opened up March 15th, 1982 with 2 employees and 1,300 square feet.
So you went from concept to opening up in 4.5 months.
Yeah.
And where did the money come from?
It takes like 4 months to get a meeting set up.
Yeah. Where did the funds come from? You guys were still pretty young.
Well, there weren't that many funds. Most people will not remember because they weren't there. But 1982, the economy was in very bad shape, especially here in Michigan. Interest rates were about 18%. And when I teach our new staff orientation, which I'll be doing Sunday again this week, I remind them the 18% was to the bank, not to the credit card company. So in our current bout of inflation, which seems incredibly small and minor and barely significant to us, to people who grew up in the 90s and 2000s, they never had inflation. For us, it's the norm. It's actually the absence of inflation that was the aberration. But anyway, we got $20,000 as a second mortgage on Paul's house. And then my grandmother lent us $2,000, no interest, which with that interest rate was actually very nice. And that was how we opened.
Wow. And then, so first days, doors open. And what was the result? Instant success?
The result was in one day, we went from 2 employees to 700. No, we worked, man. I mean, we made sandwiches, we cleaned up, we did some things well, we made some mistakes, and it sort of sums up what we're still doing today. It's just bigger.
What you studied in school, Russian history, anarchy, how does this sort of tie into the restaurant influence, or are they just sort of completely separate?
Well, at the time, I would have said they were completely separate. It was not on my mind, nor was I really worried about it. Now, I would say it's actually enormously helpful, and it's proven to be a big part of what we do. The Russian history part, especially in recent years, as I don't want to get controversial, but as conversations about autocracy, most people in the U.S. have heard a word that's kind of like that, but don't even know what it means. I've spent my whole adult life studying it, either intensively or somewhat, and I'm painfully aware of what happens in autocratic settings with the arbitrariness of application of rules and power consolidation, et cetera. And I would say also that model of autocracy, often much more benevolently than it was done or is done in Russia to this day, is still the model that most businesses use.
Interesting. Say more about that.
Well, not saying this as a criticism, but most businesses are run, essentially like monarchies. I mean, I have friends who do it. It's not a criticism. Excuse me, but it's typically, they're benevolent monarchs and they like the employees and they're trying to do the right job, the right thing, but all the decisions are still mostly made by the owner. And, that's how we started too. I mean, we had 2 employees. It never occurred to us to really do much else. But as we started to study, what I would now call whatever organizational development or, theory of leadership and stuff, then we started to see there were other ways to do it that were not out of sync with our intuitive sense of what to do, but that gave us a lot more to think about in terms of those constructs. And so 2 things I'll add, and then, one is just with you mentioned the dignity pamphlet, which really started with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is 3 years ago this month, and my feeling of helplessness and despair, and for whatever reasons, it hit me very hard. And, in my despair, I started to do really the only thing introverted history majors like me know how to do well, which is read books and study. And so I started to study Ukrainian history because I realized I knew a fair bit about Russian history, but very little about Ukraine. And despite Vladimir Putin's belief or story that Ukraine doesn't really exist, it's actually more likely that Russia came out of Ukraine than Ukraine came out of Russia.
Interesting.
But anyway, I started to study Ukrainian history, and it's not like I discovered anything that wasn't commonly known to people who had done it. I just hadn't done it. And long story short, I just felt so helpless because it felt like a school shooting for a country, for no reason. One day somebody just barged in and started killing people. And anyway, in 2014 or 2013, I'll say it's all the details, but people started to demonstrate against the Russian-sponsored president of Ukraine, and that culminated in February of 2014 with basically they threw out the Russian-sponsored president and essentially claimed their independence spiritually. They had had legal independence since the fall of the Soviet Union, and that event was called the Revolution of Dignity. And when I read that, I was like, oh my God, I know what to do. Like, this is what I can do. I can't go to Ukraine. I don't know how to shoot a gun. I'm not interested in learning, but I can make dignity happen right here, right now. And so that really led me to both research dignity more and then to commit to just, not that I was trying not to practice dignity, but to really understand it at a much deeper level and then put it to work all day, every day. And in the belief that in a country where dignity is the norm, people like Vladimir Putin could never come to power because it's antithetical to dignity. And in a country like Russia, we could not work the way we work because the way we work is antithetical to the way that country is structured. And then also that although revolution, this is my history major, as revolution is generally we're taught that it's like this event, like July 4th, 1770, but it's not. It's really more day-to-day living. Like those are political events that get into history books, but really a revolution in an anarchist sense is how I treat you right now, how I treat myself. It's what we do every day. And so a revolution of dignity could be made to happen simply by all of us deciding to treat everybody we deal with dignity.
So what did that look like from a practical perspective? How did you decide to bring dignity to your life and the lives of those people around you?
So in 1994, so 12 years in, we started Zingerman, which is our training business. And Maggie Bayless was the managing partner there. She had worked in the restaurants with me and Paul as a cocktail waitress. She was a German lit major from Oberlin College, 3 hours north of where you are in Ohio. And but she eventually went back to school at Michigan to get her MBA. And long story short, she fell in love with training, and that became her passion. So organizational training design is really her, the same way I feel about food or now about leadership. That's how she is about training. And from working with her, excuse me, for many years, I've learned like there's all these great words that everybody likes: vision, customer service. But most places have no definition and no clarity, so they just go give good service, but nobody knows what it means.
They just throw the buzzwords around.
Exactly. Excuse me. But so I was like, okay, what does dignity really mean? So I started doing homework, and I ended up with 6 elements of dignity, which I'm happy to walk through if that helps.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So the first is to honor the humanity of everybody that we're working with. It doesn't mean we need to be their therapist. It's just to acknowledge that everybody, you, me, and anybody else that we meet, everybody's got hopes, everybody's got dreams, everybody's got fears. We're all struggling. We all got insecurities. We all got things that we're having a hard time with. And so just, regardless of anybody's position on the org chart or how long they've been there or whether they're doing a good job or a bad job, they still have a life and they still matter as a human being. And so just, it could be as simple as, instead of asking them, about the football game yesterday, is to ask them how their kid's doing in school, or what they've been reading, or how their parents doing that, has had that they're having elder care, challenges. I mean, it takes 60 seconds, but just to honor who they are. The second one is to be authentic, but there's a parenthetical component, which is authenticity, but without acting out. So, dumping on somebody and then going, I'm just telling you how I feel, is not what I'm talking about. This is about being true to who you are. Sorry, I'm at the very tail end of a cold. It's being true to who you are and sharing your anxieties, but it's doing it in a way that's respectful or treats the other person with dignity. So there's ways to say what our fears are that don't just dump it on the other person. So it's not just blurting out whatever comes to your mind in a disrespectful way. It's saying, I'm really, when this happens, it really pushes my buttons and I get very anxious. Let's talk about it. The third thing is that to give everybody a meaningful say. And it doesn't mean we use consensus a lot at the partner level, but it doesn't mean we run the whole organization by consensus of all 700 people. But
that sounds like the definition of anarchy.
Well, anarchism is not chaos. That's the misconception that people have been taught. We can get into that in a minute, but we use consensus. We've been running the organization by consensus of our partners group for 30 years, which started as 6 or 7 people, but is now like 22. And we've been doing that for 30 years.
Wow.
But anyway, it doesn't mean we use consensus for all decisions at 700 people. It just means that people have a way to voice their ideas, thoughts, concerns, hopes, and dreams in a way that's constructively considered, not just like, yes, honey, that's nice, see you next year in a survey, but more that, so here we have all our meetings are open. We're open book management. We have a change process that we teach to everybody. So those are just some of the ways that it can happen. But voting certainly is one way that's super relevant in our country. But as I remind people, they vote in Russia too. It just doesn't really mean anything. So voting alone doesn't give you a meaningful say. And I think when people have a meaningful say, i.e. their voice is heard and given serious consideration, it makes a big difference.
How do you let them know that their voice is heard?
Well, as simple as what I just going to do with you right now, which is, that's a good question, Anthony. Let's, and I think that's what we do. I mean, it's really treating people with dignity. So not creating some superficial, there's a lot of big corporate programs where they have like the superficial thing with the survey and the focus group and then HR reports on it, but nothing really happens. I mean, this is where I got an email from a nice guy who works at our mail order that I know who he is. I don't see him that often. He emailed to see if I would get together for coffee. So it's on my list to answer him tonight and do it. Like, why not? So,
So
and then
you've
like,
got over 700 employees. The
yeah,
guy who works in your mail order can email you and set up
yeah,
an appointment with you.
yeah.
Okay.
But then, like I said, all the meetings are open. So next Thursday will be our Zingerman's Wide Huddle. So it's essentially where we run the organization. In a sense, it's figuratively a little bit like the board of directors meeting, but the meetings are open. So there'll be, I don't know, 40, 50 people, 60 people in the room. 16 to 18 will be partners, but the rest will be from all over the organization. And then as a carryover from the pandemic, there'll be a Zoom link and there'll be, I don't know, 40 people on there, So it's just, and if you raise your hand and you talk, it doesn't mean people are going to do what you want necessarily, but they don't do what I want necessarily either. So, and then there's a change process. So instead of you making a suggestion, then I consider it and I act like King Solomon and decide. It's teaching you how to lead so that you begin the process. And my job is to coach you on it. Even if you're not the decision maker, you can still lead change. So those are just a couple examples. And then culturally, like I said, it's just, if you're really treating people with dignity and listening and not being dismissive like they're 6 years old and they don't know what they're talking about, and not being patronizing in it, then I think it works.
It comes across as authentic, which is part of the
Yeah,
6
because
elements
it
of
is.
dignity.
Because it
Because
is.
it
Yeah.
is.
The fourth one is to choose positive beliefs, to begin with positive beliefs. So I wrote the new chapbook is a little tiny, it's what poetry gets published in a lot. So it's like 50 little pages. But I wrote a 600-page book on beliefs, which is the opposite end of the publishing continuum. But so it's a longer conversation. But metaphorically, I began as I was working on that book 10 years ago to look at beliefs like the root system of our lives, because I started to understand what I had never understood, which is that every action you and I take is based on what we believe. Other than instinct, if it's, somebody throws a ball at us, we're going to duck. But other than that, it's all, me choosing to be here, you choosing to interview me is based on our beliefs. Even if we didn't think about it that way, it's the reality. And so I like simple models that honor complexity, gives us ways to process. That's what the 6 elements of dignity are. It's what the writer Carol Sanford would call a framework. So it doesn't tell you what to do, but it gives you a frame within which to process and use your own ability. So 3 types of beliefs I started to look at: negative beliefs, neutral beliefs, positive beliefs. So if beliefs are the root system and all the actions come from the beliefs, you don't need to be a farmer or a philosopher to figure out that negative beliefs will always create negative outcomes. Mm-hmm. Neutral beliefs don't do much. Positive beliefs create positive outcomes. That's not Pollyanna, and it's not false positivity. It's not to say there's no problems, but you can have negative beliefs about a problem, which is it's their fault, it's his fault, it's her fault, we're screwed, we're victims. Or you could have positive beliefs about a problem, which is this is bad, let's get to work.
Yeah, I've got 2 young boys who are 8 and 10, and something that I try to remind myself of as well as them is that there's always good things, there's always bad things.
Yep.
Where do you want to put your attention? What do you want to focus on? I can pick the happiest day of my life, and I really think about it. I can find something wrong with that, and I can zero in on it, and I can make myself unhappy and miserable. And so I love what you're saying. Like you talk about it in terms of a farming metaphor. Yeah, if you plant seeds of happy thoughts, that's what you're going to get. If you plant seeds of miserable thoughts, you're going to get more of that.
And it's not to be Pollyanna. There's many challenges. It's just choosing to believe that people are doing the best they can with what they got, even if I really don't like what they're doing, and that my role matters and that I can choose to get involved and to try to make a difference, not just stand on the side and critique. So it means, rather than wasting my energy, was now how I would see it, telling stories about how bad you are. It's just, to just whatever. I might not have liked what you did, which in this case isn't true, but I might not have liked what somebody else did, but I just choose to believe whatever. They got something else going on, or they have limited information or misguided beliefs, but I don't need to waste my time thinking negative thoughts about them. We could just have a peer-to-peer conversation. So it doesn't mean I don't confront in a healthy way. It doesn't mean I don't bring up concerns. It just means that I'm not making up conspiracy stories about why something went wrong. The fifth one is to help everybody in the organization get to greatness. And that's my commitment, and greatness is in their terms, not mine, although it's framed by our vision and our values. So, if they come and say, I heard you want to help us get to greatness. I want to start the Zingerman's Nazi Party chapter. That's outside our values. So I could still treat them with dignity while I tell them that we're not going to do that. But within our values and vision, there's a huge range of opportunity. So some people we hire want to be managing partners here. Some want to just come in and work, and some want to, they're here for the summer and they're bussing tables and they're 17 and they're going to go away to college. So all of those are good options for greatness that they can define. It just needs to be within our frame. So employees aren't just, interchangeable machine parts. They're people that we really care about. And it's sort of obvious once you choose this belief. I mean, if 600 of the 700 people who work here feel awesome and are getting to greatness by their own terms, I'm doing wonderful. And then the last one is probably, I think, the hardest, and that's to have some reasonable modicum of equity through the organization. So, as I tell the new staff orientation, it's not, going to blow them out of their minds that I make more money than they do. Like, I think everybody knows that. But if I were to be making as much more money as some of what they read about in the news, it's ridiculous in my belief. And it's unhealthy. And this is where you could see it in Russia. If you want to use my Russian history degree, Russia has the highest economic inequity in the world. The U.S., I believe, is second. It doesn't make for healthy ecosystems if there's that much inequity. So inevitably, there's some. I'm not saying everybody, I should make the same $15 an hour or whatever, but trying to do it in a reasonable way. And then it's not just equity of money, but equity of resources for learning, equity of resources for help, equity of support, all of that. And it's hard. I'm not saying we're there. I mean, it's just trying to work on it. So these 6 things, it's they apply. I challenge myself every day to do them with everybody that I work with. And then I need to do them for myself too. So I need to honor my own humanity and imperfection, honor my authenticity. So what's true for me and what's right for me, give myself a meaningful say in my own life, which a lot of people, no one's going to say they don't, but we often give away our own values to try to please other people, to choose positive beliefs about myself. So not to be the super critical voice that I was raised with and, berate myself, to go for greatness, whatever that means for me as an individual, and then to create some kind of equity in my life, which I get to decide what it is, but that things are working out well. So after this, I'm going to go run. I run every day. I train myself to, like if people have little kids, it's appropriate that they're going to say, I can't meet at that time. I need to pick up my kid at daycare or school. Nobody argues. If you say you're going to go run, you can't meet. They're like, come on, just don't run, like whatever, and I'm like, no, I don't have kids.
Non-negotiable.
For me, because it keeps my sanity and it keeps my mental health. And what's the difference? It's like me saying, whatever, your kid will be fine. It's not that cold out. Pick them up an hour late, So it was really understanding that for me, I'm not saying that's true for everybody, but for me, that running time really helps me to stay balanced and grounded. And then really it's to remember to do dignity with our purveyors, with our community, with the planet, all the way around.
So you're part restaurateur, part author, part philosopher, and all of these things sort of intersect to support what you're doing.
I guess. I mean, everybody's a lot more than one thing. Nobody's one thing.
Fair enough, but
you're a podcaster, a business owner, a father, and a nice guy, and of Calabrian heritage. I already know all that.
Wow, you created quite a list there pretty shortly. Let's go back a little bit further. Why Russian history? Why did it start there?
I don't know. I liked it. No, well, I mean, I'm Russian Jewish background, but Russian Jews are not bonded to Russian history. They weren't allowed to be part of it for the most part. Uh, so that's not really why. I liked it. And they didn't have general studies in those days. So I needed to declare a major when I got to junior year. And I picked that. I've always been interested in the people on the periphery. So not like inspired by the czars or the Soviet rulers, but more the people on the edge. So Soviet dissidents, the anarchists, the 1905 revolution where they tried to install a democratic system and failed, et cetera. So it's the people who were pushed out to the edge and treated in the context of our previous conversation without dignity.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, let's go back to the restaurants now. So you started this first restaurant back in the early 80s with your friend and your partner. It was a deli. Took quite a bit of work to get off the ground. When did you get to the point where you're like, we're onto something here, we can build on this?
Well, it's still a lot of work. Everything's a lot of work, I think, to do well, whether it's podcasting or parenting or writing poetry or running a business. There's nothing easy about any of it, I don't think. I mean, you have a moment here and there it feels easy, but it's the exception, not the rule, I think. But anyway, it didn't really work like that. It was in 1993. So we were 11 years in. We expanded the building twice. It was only 1,300 square feet. So we had added on twice. We're in a historic district. So it's not that easy to make changes. And one summer day, so the opposite end of the calendar from where you and I are right now, it's sunny here in Ann Arbor today, but it was a lot warmer then. And there's a little bench out front of the deli building. And Paul grabbed me about 10 in the morning, which is anybody who's worked in food, that's when I should have been inside getting the sandwich line ready for the lunch rush. And he sits me down out front on the bench and he looks at me and he's like, okay, in 10 years, what are we doing? And I'm like, I don't know what we're doing in 10 years. That little question turned into, in the moment, kind of like, why are you bothering me? And, he was like, no, this is our work. What are we doing? So when we opened the deli in 1982, we did not write a vision the way we now do it all the time. Not because we thought it was a bad idea or had negative beliefs about it, but just we didn't know you could write a vision. Most people don't. But in hindsight, we had one in our heads, which is quite common. Everybody who's getting to greatness of their choosing, whether it's in your marketing work or in parenting, whatever, everybody's imagined this positive future that they're going towards. So in our heads, we knew from the beginning we wanted something really special. We didn't want to be a copy of New York or Chicago or Detroit. We knew we wanted great food and great service and a great place for people to work. And we knew we wanted to do it in a very down-to-earth way, which doesn't seem that radical in 2025. But in 1982, to get really amazing food, you really had to get dressed up most of the time, and that wasn't what we wanted. And from the beginning, we knew we only wanted one. No disrespect to those who open chains. It's just not my thing. For me, it's boring. I mean, I'm not saying other people shouldn't do it, but I am not drawn to that. I'm drawn to the places where 20 years later, you still remember going there because it was so amazing. Sort of like your dad's family village. Like if there were 20 of them dotted across the United States, it wouldn't be such a special experience to go back and visit. So that's really what we wanted. And that's really what Paul was, he goes, well, we've turned down offers from other cities because we're only opening one and people are opening on campus because we won't open other spots over there. And, what are we doing? And I was like, Paul, I got work to do. And he's like, no, this is our work. So in hindsight, I would say he was asking me, what's your vision? We just didn't have that language. Mm-hmm. I don't think he had one. I know I didn't have one. It's not like we were satisfied because we've always been about continuous improvement long before there was a Toyota way. But there's a big difference between improving what you have and going after an inspiring vision of the future. So anyway, his question started a year-long argument, eye rolls, lots of swear words and frustration. But as we still do today, we just keep coming back to the table until we figure it out. And we had a lot of conversations. And during that year, we got to know a guy named Stash Kazmierski. And Stash passed away, I think it's 7 years ago this May, which is very sad for us. But he taught us the process that we now call visioning. And he had learned it from a guy named Ron Lippitt, who was at the Institute of Social Research here at University of Michigan in the late 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s. And Ron called it preferred futuring. That's how Stash, who was one of the many people who learned it from Ron, taught it to us, and then we've adapted it to be what we do now. But out of that learning, we wrote our first vision, and it was called Zingerman's 2009. So if you're quick at math, you realize we went 15 years in the future, not 10. And that vision was the first time we ever wrote one, and it basically described that we would create a community of businesses so we could grow, but keep the deli unique. We would open other Zingerman's businesses with different specialties, so it would all be one organization, so we could provide opportunity and create synergy across the organization. But we wouldn't do what everybody else did, which is open 23 more delis. And that there would be managing partners in each business, which you referenced in the intro, because our experience was we liked working as partners, even though we have our days of disagreement, that we both felt a lot better being in it with somebody than being alone. And that this is a generalization, which I don't really like to do normally, but in general, in restaurant world, when the owner's on site, it's a different energy than when you're in unit number 12 and the manager means well, but it's not the same. And I never liked that. And that's what we didn't want. So that's what we wrote in that vision. And that's where the growth came from. So it wasn't like knowing that we were ready, because I don't think you're ever ready. It's just deciding that that was what we were going to create for all those reasons.
That's really interesting. And so what was the second? It's just to understand, you didn't want to open up 10 of the same thing because that's just boring to you.
Correct.
Even though that there would be scales of efficiency there, because you can replicate sort of the same footprint, the same model, the same food ordering.
Yeah.
I don't care about that. Like, I want to be more
Correct.
creative. I want to use my energy in a different way.
And it's not like from a customer. I mean, no disrespect, because I have friends who do it, but like, nobody goes to the X restaurant that started downtown and now is in the suburbs. It's way more convenient, and you're happy because you got 2 kids like you do and you don't want to drive downtown, and it's still pretty good. But like, nobody goes in there and it's like, this is awesome. No. Like, it's convenient and you like convenience, and I'm not down on convenience, but I'm much more interested in creating unique things that are really compelling and special that people want to talk about, because they're really not the same as everything else.
And so this managing partner model, obviously you're giving up some equity, but you think the trade-off is worth it because you're getting somebody who's a lot more invested. This is their baby, and they're going to be sort of fine-tuning the details more so than a general manager would. Yeah.
Correct. And that's obviously, there can be people who are owners that don't do a good job, and there's some awesome managers in the world. So it's a generalization, but yeah, I mean, here's the pattern that's very common. We bring you in to be the general manager of the new restaurant we're starting. It's Calabrian food. You're excited. We give you a bonus on profit. You love it. But then 2 years later, you're like, I got this other offer to go to New York, and that, and now you're gone. And now I got your work. And it's like, I was already working full time. I don't need your work. I would have been fine with what we had. So again, there's no guarantees, but it's really different when it's their passion and their dream, and it fits with our dream, and we can work together. It's a whole lot different.
And so, are you coming up with the new idea and then looking for a partner to step in? Are people bringing the concepts to you?
Yeah. It sounds good to say we have the idea and we look, but it's never really worked. I got a lot of ideas. Ideas are very inexpensive. The hard part's finding who wants to do it for 20 years. And so it's played out that it really works better when it's their idea and it fits with our vision and our values.
And so then what do they get by becoming a part of the Zingerman's family? Why not just they've got this idea
Yeah.
going and
Well,
started
for
on their
some
own?
people, it makes sense. I mean, it's up to them. There's an essay in part one of the business book, Building a Great Business, which you referenced in the intro, that's called 12 Natural Laws of Business. Really, I learned later 12 Natural Laws of Living a Great Life. But basically, they're like gravity. Everybody who's getting to greatness I don't mean making the most money, but getting to greatness of their own choosing is essentially living those natural laws. So whether it's a basketball team or a symphony orchestra or a small business or a big business or a country or a community for that matter, they're living those natural laws. One of them is strengths lead to weaknesses. And one of them is that success means you get better problems. So if you open multiple units of the same thing, then you described what some of the strengths are. But then the problem is it's not interesting. If you choose to open different things, then you get that problem, which is you have to learn a new industry every time. But we chose that problem. So for us, it
And
worked out. And what do
and so
they
when
get?
they become, yeah.
What do they get? So they get to be, if they want to work on their own, that's the problem they're choosing. That's where I was headed. If they want to be part of a collective with partners, they get to have that. So yeah, if they want to do it on their own, go for it. I would never try to talk them out of it. If you want to work as part of something bigger than yourself, then this is a great place to do it. So they get the support of the organization. They get all these cool people to work with. They get, now like our name is tied to it. So whatever the business school would call it, brand equity that we've built up over 43 years becomes part of their business equation. And then they're not alone, which I mean, I would say from having trained, talked to, and having friends who own businesses and have no partners is lonely, man. I mean, it's lonely enough when you have partners. And, most people's spouse gets sick of hearing about it. So, who do you talk to, right? And some people are lucky and they got a good friend that they talk to about all the time, but a lot of people have nobody. And so this is where, we choose to work collaboratively, which has its issues too, but they're the issues we choose.
So from a practical standpoint, they're going to get maybe some financial support. They
Yeah,
get
they
some
own, well, they own a
infrastructure
share.
and administrative support, payroll benefits, things
Yeah,
like
and they
that.
pay in for that. I mean, it's not free. But and then we make decisions by consensus. So, whether they own 10% or 90%, we still make partner level decisions by consensus. So it doesn't, as Maggie always would say, it's implicit consensus. It doesn't mean she's calling me and Paul every time she wants to change the size of the glass, but as she describes it, if in her gut, she knows we're not going to like it, or she's concerned we might not like it, she knows she really should pick up the phone and call. And then they participate in running the whole organization. That's how we set it up from the beginning. So if your marketing business was in what we call the ZCOB or Zingerman's Community of Businesses, you would be the partner in there, and you're a partner running the whole organization as part of that partners group.
And so how is it that, what was the number? Over 200 folks?
So then we have another thing that's we call it community shares. So it's a way to, an imperfect but meaningful way to create employee ownership. And those shares are different. So that's not being the managing partner. It's owning a share in the brand. We spent 5 years trying to figure out how to do it. It's not easy here because we have, 15 different companies that are different ownership in each one. But it was a way to create a chance, like if you came to work here as a baker or a barista at the coffee house or, whatever, you could own a share. And like, where else are you going to make coffee drinks in Ann Arbor that you're going to be an owner in the business? And so it's $1,000 a share. They can only keep the share while they work. It's like a co-op. So I own one, 275 other people own one. And, they get, again, the psychic value of being an owner, which for me is more important than the money. But others are different. They get a dividend based on the profit of the whole organization. And they also get a little coupon book with cool stuff. And then if they leave, we give them they get the $1,000 back.
So the share is always worth $1,000. They just get the dividend and
Correct.
some of the other benefits that
Yeah,
go with
because
it.
we're not selling the business, so there's no, it's not Google, like you have stock options and one day you're going to be a billionaire if you just hold on long enough.
Yeah.
That's a
Um,
whole other conversation. We have a perpetual purpose trust, but
what is that? What is a
we
perpetual
need to do
purpose
like
trust?
10 podcast episodes to get all this.
We're
So
not going to get to any of my questions here, but that's all right. We're talking
that's
about
okay. We
interesting
got a
stuff
lot of
here.
good stuff to do.
Yeah.
So perpetual purpose trust, there's about 45 or 50 in the US. There's going to be a lot more in the years to come. Again, not saying this judgmentally. The typical business model is whatever. You and I have, start Anthony's Pizza. We build it up. We open a few spots. We get to be my age. We sell it. We retire. We take the money. We move to, I don't know, wherever people want to move to, and on it goes. Usually the sale goes to a bigger company who goes, oh, Anthony's Pizza, that Codespotti guy, I love it. We're going to go national with it. And they, generally it doesn't go that great in my experience. This is the other way. So instead of we plant a forest, we clear cut the forest and take the money, this is to make an old growth forest. So in a very simplistic sense, it's me and Paul gifting the brand to itself so it can never be sold. So it creates a trust that owns a share. The trust has a veto so that it's not really running the organization. That's already being done elsewhere, but that it precludes the brand from being sold to whoever for $100 million so that Zingerman stays here in the community if we do our work well for 50, 100, 150 years. So instead of
It basically it puts a mechanism in place that
yeah,
prevents it from being sold to
yeah,
a PE firm or
yeah.
whoever else.
Well, instead of what happens to almost all of those companies, which is like, these two cool guys started this business in Ann Arbor and it's an Ann Arbor institution and then we sell it. And now there's somebody, no disrespect, sitting on the 18th floor of a Manhattan office building deciding what the price of corned beef should be, or somebody in, Dubai or Denver or whatever that's, taking home the profit. It's keeping the decision-making power and the money, most all of it, in the community so that, because of an organization like ours, it's not just about the sales and the jobs, it's the quality. Like a job in a bad workplace is not the same as a job in a healthy workplace. 43 years later, we have people who met in our business. We have people who met working in our business. We have people who grew up eating in our business. The amount of contributions to the community, like it's not just this plug and play thing that you pull up and drop down somewhere else. It's got roots and interconnectivity. And if you study forests, the enrichment to the ecosystem from an old growth forest far exceeds what the same number of trees would be in an industrial forest planted 5 miles away.
So what happens to your shares upon your passing?
Well, our shares are slowly moving more and more to the employees that own a share. So that's an LLC that they own in. So we've already moved 10% in the first few years, and we'll move another 5% each year, probably till we get to 55% will be owned by the employees. And then, there's some other pieces, and Paul and I keep, I don't even remember, 5 or 10% goes to our heirs, but they have no decision-making say. They just, have the equity stake.
So we've talked a lot about several books, pamphlets,
Yeah.
chapter books that you've written.
Yeah.
Where can people find these? Are you
Yeah.
is this Barnes and Noble, like Amazon.com? Like
They get it at codespotti.com. No. So yes, good question. It probably won't be surprising after the first hour of our conversation that we're not following the more typical models. So I didn't love the big publishing world, which I did a book with many years ago. And then I decided, let's just do it ourselves. We were already doing a lot of design. You can see over my shoulder the part of a Zingerman's poster. And so we went back to doing our own. So we're sort of the farm to table version of books. We do everything, design, layout. They're printed locally here in town. We stay off of Amazon. in the belief that it's not values aligned with the way we work. And the more one works in ways that are values aligned, the better one's life is. And so that's what we do. So zingermanspress.com or zingtrain.com. Or if they're in town, they're in the deli or the roadhouse or the coffee company or whatever.
So what didn't you like? That you did the one book with traditional publishing. What went
Well,
wrong there?
There were a number of things. And again, I choose positive beliefs, so I'm not believing people were trying to mess me up. It's just, I think the communication styles were not really that values aligned, which made it painful because they were talking to people who worked here in ways that we don't talk to each other here. And then, I don't like the quality I didn't like the quality of paper that they chose for the book, but it's their book at that point. You don't really own, and so it's what I'm not a musician, but I listen to a lot of music and I read a lot of stuff about music. And I would always read these interviews with bands and they would say like, yeah, we lost control of the music to the label and that, it's overproduced. It's this, it's that. Why? Because when you sign a deal with a record label, it's not your record. It has your name on it, but it's the label's record. They own it and they get to make the decisions, unless you're Taylor Swift or whatever, and you get to some point where you can have, artistic in quotes control. And this was the same thing. It's like becomes their version of your book, not your book. For many people, that's fine. It's just, I care where the line breaks go. And I care the quality of the paper, and they were focused on hitting a price point. So they wanted lower quality paper. And I'm like, our customers don't care. They'd rather have a nicer book and pay more. That's what we sell. Like it's incongruous, to sell a cheaper book to get a price point when what we do is find the best quality food that we can get and charge whatever we need to charge. It doesn't make sense. And one of the anarchist beliefs that really has informed my life is the belief that the means that you use, so how you go about doing something, needs to be aligned with the ends that you're trying to achieve or congruent with the ends you're trying to achieve. So in a leadership standpoint, that would be the common but unfortunate thing where the boss yells at the employees for giving bad service is incongruous. So this is like having a moderately priced Zingerman's book to reach more people when our whole focus for, at that time, 25 years was to don't worry about hitting the mainstream, find the amazing olive oil, the amazing cheese, and just charge what you need to charge. So it was just frustrating. And then I was like, I don't live on the books, so I'd rather sell less books and feel good about it than sell more books and get more money and not like it.
And so why write the books? Is this
Well, I
like a
started
passion
writing.
project? Is it?
No, I started writing. I never aspired to write. I'm a history major, so I kind of knew how to write history papers, but that's not a claim to fame unless you're a professor, which I'm not. When we started the deli in '82, right from the beginning, we had like a little print on paper newsletter, just in the belief, which we still have now, which is if we can't tell you why our products are special, why would you want to buy them? And that went pretty well. I was never really thrilled. It's not like it was bad, but I was always a little frustrated with the way the stuff was written or whatever. And in hindsight, that was my fault, not the people who were doing it. But anyway, one of them moved out of town and I just was like, screw it, I'm going to do it myself. And then I started to try to write. And at the time, this is still before computers were commonly used, as ripping up paper and my perfectionism, making it painful and, yada, yada, yada. But I plowed ahead and I started to get nice comments and, I was like, well, whatever. And then I got more nice comments and then people started going, you need to do a book. And I was like, I don't know about doing a book. And more people were saying it. And they naively said, oh, you already have the whole thing because you've written all these newsletters, which is completely not true, but it sounds good when you're not the one doing it. But anyway, so then at some point, which is probably almost 30 years ago now, I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I really don't know anything about writing. I better go learn some. So I got in a writing group that somebody told me about, and I did that for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, which was hugely helpful. And I started reading books about writing, and I just kept working at it. And so here we are. Why do it? It's kind of like running for my mind. Uh, it makes me get clarity on what I'm thinking. It pushes me. So now I do this e-news every week, which is not a small venture or adventure. It's a lot of work, but I like it a lot. It's like running a marathon every week. But every week I learn new things because I'm like studying new, it's not a 6-line, 2-paragraph, here's what we, come to our training session. That's not unhelpful, but this is really pushing myself to think about current events, talk about how I'm feeling, and then provide something useful for the reader that actually helps their life. So the writing, and then, as we get older, also it's very good succession work because stuff is written down. It places us. I didn't do it to place us in the marketplace, but I think it does place us in the marketplace because we're not just one more company with superficial, slick ads. No, well, it was kind of judgment, but I didn't mean it at anybody in particular. But I mean, it's actually substantive in its thoughtfulness.
Tell us more about the e-news. What kind of content's in there, and how
Yeah,
can folks
so
find it?
it's 5 items every week. I started it, I've lost track, 7 years ago, in part because I realized, like, as we grew organizationally, in a good way, like each of our businesses had their own marketing going, and that was great. But then one day I was like, other than this print newsletter that has grown and that we've been doing for whatever at the time, 35 years, there was really no single place that you would learn about our different businesses in one spot. So if you knew about them, it was great, but you could easily be a customer at the deli for years and not know we had food tours, or you could be a Zing Train client for leadership training, but not realize that we had Miss Kim, this awesome regional Korean food restaurant. And so I thought, I'm going to do one thing where I can mix it up. So 1 week, 5 things. It could be something from Miss Kim. It could be an olive oil. It could be a book. It could be whatever. And then sometimes I would write about leadership as one of the 5 things. And then when the pandemic hit, I moved that leadership piece more to the top, and I started to get, like, I'd already been writing business books, but people started to respond a lot more to it, that it was giving them hope in difficult times, and et cetera. So I just sort of ran with that, and the leadership piece got longer and became more evolved, and it stayed at the top. So it's one piece about leadership. This current week that we're in right now, I wrote about reflection as a tool. It's not a new subject for me, but the sort of realization through other people's conversations about getting through the turbulent times that we're in, and that how important it is to stay grounded through them. And that if you don't have like, I journal every morning, but if you don't have some method to stay grounded, it's hard enough anyway, let alone now. So it was just reflecting, I really write it real time, so it can quote people like Timothy Snyder, who's from Southern Ohio, the historian of Ukraine, but it can be from, like, somebody's podcast from Saturday might be in next week's e-news. And so it had that piece on reflection, and then I'm going from memory, but it had, we do a fundraiser every February in memory of my corgi Jelly Bean, who died 10 years ago this spring, and we do it for the women's shelter. It's called Jelly Bean Jump Up, and the bakehouse makes corgi decorated cookies that look like corgis. So it was about the corgi cookies, and then I wrote about the fresh mullet, which is amazing fish that we get from North Carolina coast that's at the Roadhouse. And then it was, let's see, what else was in there? I'm drawing a blank. I don't know, 2 more foods. I can look it up, but I'm already on to next week.
I'm so glad that you mentioned Miss Kim. She was a guest on this show a few weeks back. Folks listening to this one, you should go back and listen. It'll give you just a slightly different perspective on some of the same concepts and philosophies that Ari's been sharing with us here today. Is there a particular restaurant concept that you would be eager to do, that you're like, man, I wish somebody would come to me with something in this
I'd
kind of
love to do
theme?
Calabrian food if you want to move up here. Let's get going. I mean it. It's awesome, man. I mean, there's a lot of things I would like to do, but yeah, I guess maybe somebody's listening. But I've long wanted to do Tunisian food, a good regional Italian. Really, any region would be great. I'm a big fan of Italy and Italian cooking. Uh, there's so many Catalan food. I mean, and then there's tons that I don't even know anything about. That would be wonderful too.
You talked a lot about sort of the quality of the book and the paper and the
Yeah.
pages, and taking sort of that same meticulous approach to finding good quality food.
hmm
Say more about how you go about sourcing your food items.
So in the early 90s, 1991 to be exact, so we were 9 years into business. We, had grown from 2 employees to, I don't know, 100 and something. And we, from reading leadership books, there were no podcasts then. Uh, we realized we should really, would benefit from writing down a mission, which I had been super skeptical about mission statements. They mostly seemed like mediocre poetry that was hung by customer bathrooms and served no practical purpose in the world. But something I read changed my beliefs. So we did the work to do that. And at the same time, we embarked on the work to write our guiding principles. So basically, it was to try to take the unwritten values that Paul and I had held in our heads and our hearts from the beginning, and then say, like, okay, well, what are they? Like, as we grow, it's more and more important that it's not just, when you have 2 employees, you're standing there all day, whatever, you're managing almost everything. But when you have 120 employees, you're mostly not next to most of them most of the time. And if you don't have clear organizational values, they're just using the values that they came with, which may or may not be aligned. And so we started the work to do that. And then the first one on the list was about food. And then we realized that we needed to get clarity back to, what you're asking about dignity. What is quality? So everybody says they have quality, and I'm just a history major, not an English major, but we learned that quality is what is known as a subjective word, not an objective word. And hence, if you don't define it, it doesn't really mean anything. So it's fair to say that everybody has high quality if they're working to their own standard, but our standard is not the same as a fast food chain. Not that one's better and one's worse. It's just they're defining it in a different way. So after many conversations, we settled on full flavor, which we defined further to mean complexity, balance, and finish. And then we decided as the second thing is traditional food is always what we do. I mean, there's a few exceptions, but almost everything we work on is to go back to the old ways of doing it. Certainly there's areas like coffee, olive oil, wine, where technology has been hugely helpful. But in the 20th century, most technology in food was used to make it cheaper, more consistent, and eliminate the variability, which was inherent in the old way of doing it. So it's not like we're, Luddites that are opposed to technology, but it's just going back to the old way, often using technology to do that is what we're always pushing. So how do we find products? We look for full flavor, traditional foods. And because we also believe that everything can be made better, we're never done. So no matter how good something is today, we know we can work on making it better, and we're just always pushing ourselves. Can we find a better raw material? Can we improve the technique? Can we change the timing? What can we do to make it even better still? So those two things are what we're doing. So it's just studying.
So at your scale, does it make sense for you guys? Are you traveling internationally to visit, sort of
Yeah.
the birthplace of some of these foods to try to
Oh yeah.
find new
Yeah.
suppliers?
Yeah, we are. I mean, in the beginning it was me, but now it's lots of people, and we don't have, people from the outside often fantasize that there's this job where that's all you do, but it's not. It's you have a job, and then you also might do some of that. And then it's food, not, something, whatever. There's food everywhere. So if you go on vacation with your kids, there's food. So you're always learning. But yeah, I still have the strong belief that it's really hard to understand a product until you go to where it came from. Because, usually in training, Maggie would say the people who live in the community where the food dish or whatever came from are unconsciously competent in how to eat it. In other words, they don't pay a lot of it, like the way your grandmother makes it, like you don't even think about it. It's just you go over there until she gets older and maybe she's gone. And then you're like, wow, what did she do? Right. But when you come from the outside, then, we're paying a lot more attention. And so the things that people, in Calabria or whatever would assume Americans didn't care about, we cared about. So, they'd be like, well, you won't like this. It's too blah. And we go, no, what do you eat? And they're like, well, we eat this, but you won't like it. And I was like, no, that's what we want. And so it was really just getting into it in a way that gives a much deeper understanding of the food, how it matters. So like we're in the upper Midwest where wild rice is a huge piece of the Ojibwe tradition in this part of the world. Well, I didn't grow up on wild rice. I mean, I wouldn't have known anything about it. But then by going to the Ojibwe communities and starting to study it and understand, like in those communities, wild rice is religion, it's economics, it's spirituality, it's huge. And then understanding from studying that like 90% of what's sold in the US is not really wild rice anymore. It's cultivated wild rice. They taste completely different. You can guess that the cultivated one is not better. And then doing the work. So to honor the tradition from whence it came, honor why it matters in Ojibwe culture, and then to source it in ways that get us this really amazing wild rice that we can treat with dignity and respect. It costs way more. It tastes way better. And then teach people what it is.
Ari, I've just got one more question for you, but before I ask it, I want to do two things. Everyone listening today, I know that you love today's episode because Ari's been a very insightful and philosophical guest. Please hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app so you get more of this great content. Ari, I also want to let people know the best way either to get in touch with you or to continue to follow your story.
Yeah, the best way is super simple. Just email me, Ari@Zingermans.com, ARI, and I'll answer you.
Great.
That's
Last
the easiest way. Yeah.
Great. Last question for you. As you look to the future of Zingerman's, what's one thing that you're most excited about that's coming up?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, because we have visioning work that we do, we have a vision for 2032. So it actually describes what our organization will be like, whatever we're in now, 7 years from now. I think for me, it's just making the organization continue to be healthy. We'll always be imperfect. We mess up daily, but if we can get 80% of what we wrote in that vision to happen, and we're still here and we're still functioning and creating great meals and great food and great service and a great place for people to work, which is also where we started in 82, that'd be awesome.
Is there a specific thing on that 2032 vision that?
There's a lot that I like. I mean, it's, one is the idea of working with young people. So not hiring young people, which we also do, but this is work that we've now begun because this was written in 2020. But it's like teaching what I'm talking about here to teaching beliefs to 9-year-olds, teaching visioning to 10-year-olds, because they're really life skills and they're not taught in schools. They're not taught in most families. And yet, dude, I mean, I wish I would have known it at 9. It would have saved me a lot of stress and a lot of therapy, and my life would have been less challenging. We still have problems. But anyway, so that's in there. Certainly the work, the last section is about love and actively putting love into everything we do and actually saying it overtly. Also super important. So, and then just making the food better, the service better, the succession work that we're doing, which is in part the Perpetual Purpose Trust that I talked about, like just seeing, to pull off succession in a healthy way is no small thing.
Is there something that you can hand to me today to help teach some of those skills to my 8 and 10-year-old boys?
Yeah.
And to myself.
All those books, man. They're not going to read the book as it is, but you could teach it to them, and people who work here do. I mean, I still remember one of she left for another job probably 8 or 10 years ago, but one of our designers one day when the Beliefs book came out, And, the next year she's like, yeah, I taught there's a self-fulfilling cycle. That's sort of the core of the book, which I learned from Bob and Judith Wright's book, Transform. But anyway, she goes, last night I taught the belief cycle to my son, who's like the age of your kids. And, I was like, what happened? She goes, well, he came home from school and he's like, I suck at math. I'm terrible at math. And she goes, so I showed him, like, if you start with that negative belief, it's self-fulfilling, because you'll freak out every time you have to do math. You'll freeze. You'll never really do the homework. And then you'll find a way to get through life being bad at math. But if you believe that it's just a little harder for you than some of the other kids, but you can do it, you'll completely alter your course. People teach visioning. We end every meeting with appreciations, which is a wonderful technique that I learned from my friend Lex Alexander in North Carolina 35 years ago. People do it at the dining room table, so this is the thing that one of the things that I think few people understand about business or organizations or work is it's not like the work stops when you leave, and so many people leave work angry. Right now in the country, we got a lot of people terrified about their future or whether they'll have a job. Like, there's no way that's not causing severe mental damage to the children at home, like, unless the parent is incredibly grounded. And even then, like, how can that stress not pass through? Conversely, if you feel good about yourself because you've been treated with dignity, you understand that negative beliefs about your child are unhelpful. You've learned energy management, which we teach to everybody, et cetera. It's going to change your kid's life too, and there's no guarantees, but wouldn't you, I wish I would have learned how to write a vision. I don't know how they let me into University of Michigan without writing one.
Ari, I want to be the first one to thank you for sharing both your time and your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
Man. We could do it again. Happy to help. And again, if people want to reach out, ari@zingermans.com. The books are Zingerman's Press, or Zing Train is also our training business. So we do seminars on all this stuff. And if they want to go eat food, they could come visit. And Zingerman's Food Tours, we take them to the producing places. There's one going on this week in Oaxaca, Mexico.
And where do they find out about the food tours?
ZingermansFoodTours.com.
There you go. He makes it easy. All the URLs are easy to remember.
Or just
if anybody
get lost, email me and I'll help you.
There you go. And if anybody missed them, we'll have them in the show notes. So,
yeah, and if they want to get on the e-news, just email me. I'll send it back and they can sign up.
Perfect. Okay. Well, folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for learning with us today.